John had always been a careful man, methodical, attentive, cautious. But lately something had been gnawing at him, an unease he couldn't shake. His daughter Emily was 10 years old, a bright and cheerful girl who loved drawing and reading bedtime stories. But over the past few months, he noticed his wife Sarah behaving strangely. She would disappear into Emily's room at odd hours, sometimes whispering to herself, sometimes holding back tears. John tried to dismiss it at first. Maybe she was just stressed, he thought. Maybe it was nothing. But the unease grew. One night after Sarah went to bed early, John found himself sitting in the living room, staring at the hallway leading to Emily's room. His heart was pounding. He told himself he shouldn't. He knew it was wrong. But curiosity and fear mixed in a dangerous way. He set up a small, discreet camera in Emily's room, hidden behind the bookshelf. He rationalized it in his head. I just need to know. Just for peace of mind. The first few nights, nothing happened. Emily slept soundly. Sarah came and went quietly. But then John noticed subtle patterns. Sarah often sat by Emily's bed, whispering softly. He couldn't hear the words, but the intensity in her expression was unmistakable. The suspense tore at him. He spent nights reviewing the footage, trying to understand what she was doing. And every night he saw Sarah crying quietly, holding something small in her hands, a tiny box, a notebook, something precious. John's mind raced. What was she hiding? Why didn't she tell him? The tension between them, unspoken and growing, began to suffocate him. That night he watched Sarah kneel by Emily's bed, brushing her hair back, whispering comforting words. And finally she opened the small box. Inside were tiny letters, drawings, and keepsakes from her childhood, things she had saved, memories she was sharing with Emily. John felt a pang of guilt. He realized he had been letting suspicion cloud his judgment. And yet, the pain of not knowing, of seeing the silent sorrow on her face through a lens, was almost unbearable. He turned off the monitor and leaned back in his chair. He knew something had to change. He needed to confront his own fears and talk to Sarah, before the distance between them grew too wide. John couldn't sleep that night. The footage he had seen replaying in his mind over and over. Sarah kneeling by Emily's bed, whispering softly, tears falling unnoticed, made his chest tighten. He paced the living room, glancing at the hallway leading to his daughter's room. Every shadow felt heavier. Every creak in the floor sounded like a warning. He tried to convince himself, maybe I'm overthinking this. She's just worried, stressed, nothing more. But the feeling in his gut, the gnawing suspicion, wouldn't leave him. He thought back to the past months. The small signs he had ignored. Sarah always staying late in Emily's room. Her soft sighs when she thought he wasn't listening. The nights she came back from work exhausted, holding something tight to her chest. Why won't she tell me what's happening? The thought of talking to her crossed his mind. But every time he tried, the words died in his throat. He feared the answer. He feared confrontation. So instead he watched, every night reviewing the footage on his phone, hidden under his blanket. The camera captured every detail. The way Sarah held Emily's hand, the trembling in her voice, the sorrow in her eyes. One night, John noticed something he hadn't seen before. Sarah holding a small, worn notebook, opening it with reverence. She whispered something to Emily, and words he couldn't hear. Then she pressed it to Emily's chest and kissed her forehead. John's heart ached. He realized he had been watching not because of distrust, but because of fear. Fear of losing his family. Fear of not understanding. Fear of the unknown. Over the next few days, he became more observant in real life, not through the camera. He watched Sarah interact with Emily during the day, reading stories, helping with homework, laughing at her clumsy drawings. He saw tenderness and love the way a mother would care for her child. But the mystery remained. That notebook, the whispered words, what was so private, so urgent, that she had to hide it even from him? One evening, John decided he could no longer just watch. He waited until Emily fell asleep and Sarah stepped out to the kitchen. Heart-pounding, he approached the hallway to Emily's room, hesitant. He wanted answers, but he wanted to be gentle. He knocked softly on the door. Sarah? No reply. He pushed the door open slightly and peeked inside. The sight stopped him cold. Sarah sat on the floor by Emily's bed, tears streaming down her face. The small notebook was open, filled with delicate, childish handwriting. Emily's handwriting, mixed with tiny sketches. It was a memory journal, a book Sarah had been keeping, documenting Emily's milestones. Her first words, her first steps, the little things that made her daughter unique. Every night Sarah wrote in it, sometimes whispering words of encouragement or love, recording moments Emily would forget as she grew. John's chest tightened. He had misunderstood everything. He had assumed secrecy and deception, when in truth it was love, pure, protective and fragile. He stepped inside quietly. Sarah looked up, startled, her eyes wide. I didn't know you were watching, John said, voice shaking. I'm sorry. Sarah paused, then nodded. I didn't want you to worry. It's just our little thing. John knelt beside her, his hand resting on hers. I see now. I was afraid of not understanding. But this is beautiful. You're doing something amazing for Emily, for us. Tears filled Sarah's eyes and she pulled him into a hug. I wanted to make sure she remembers everything. She's growing up so fast. I can't hold it all in my head. John held her tightly. I get it now, and I promise no more secret cameras. I want to be part of it, all of it. For the first time in months, they sat together in silence, listening to Emily's soft, even breathing in her sleep. The fear, the suspicion, the tension, it all began to dissolve, replaced with understanding, love, and a renewed connection. John realized that sometimes the things we fear most are not threats, but glimpses into the hearts of those we love, if we only take the time to understand them. That night, for the first time in a long time, John went to bed not with suspicion, but with peace. The following morning, sunlight crept through the blinds, cutting soft lines of gold across the living room floor. For the first time in weeks, John didn't wake with that heavy pit in his stomach. Instead, there was silence, not the cold, suspicious kind, but a peaceful quiet, like the house itself was finally breathing again. He could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen, the faint clatter of dishes, the soft hum of Sarah's voice, humming a tune she used to sing back when things were simple, back when laughter came easily. John sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand over his tired face. He felt guilty, deeply guilty, for letting fear turn into distance, for letting doubt take the place of trust. As he walked into the kitchen, Sarah looked up, surprised but calm. Morning, she said softly. Morning, John replied, forcing a small smile. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was fragile, like glass after a storm. He finally said, about last night. I meant what I said. I shouldn't have. Sarah interrupted gently. Let's not talk about it right now. Her tone wasn't cold. It was weary but understanding. She poured him coffee, handed him a cup, and sat across the table. The silence stretched again, but it was different now. Not angry, just cautious. John sipped the coffee, eyes tracing the details of her face, the tiredness around her eyes, the faint smile that appeared when she looked toward the window. He realized he had stopped noticing those things long ago. After a while, Sarah spoke. You know, she began slowly, when you lose trust in someone, it's not just about what they did, it's about what you thought they were capable of. John nodded. I know, he said quietly. And I became someone I never wanted to be. She looked at him, eyes glistening but steady. You were scared. Yes, John admitted. Of losing you. Of losing us. There was no anger in her expression, just sadness. And something else. Compassion. The conversation that followed was not easy. They talked about the distance between them, the way grief and stress had slowly changed their family. Sarah confessed that the nightly visits to Emily's room were her way of coping, a ritual to remind herself that despite everything, their daughter was still here, still safe, still growing. She had lost her own mother suddenly years ago, and she had never really healed from that, I guess, she whispered. I didn't want Emily to grow up without memories of me, not the way I grew up without mine. John reached across the table and took her hand. I didn't know you felt that way, he said softly. I didn't either. Until I started writing to her, she said. Every night I write one thing I love about her. One thing I hope she remembers when I'm gone. Tears welled in John's eyes. You're not going anywhere. Sarah smiled sadly. No one plans to. That sentence hit him deeper than she realized. It made him think of how fragile time really was, how easily the days slipped by, how many things went unsaid, how many moments were missed because of pride or fear. After breakfast, John walked Emily to school. She held his hand tightly, talking about a drawing contest she wanted to enter. Her laughter, bright and free, echoed down the street, washing away the tension that had once filled the house. He looked at her and thought, this is what matters. Not suspicion, not fear, just moments like this. Later that evening, John came home early. He found Sarah sitting on the porch watching the sunset, the same notebook resting on her lap. He sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. The sky was painted in oranges and purples, the kind of quiet beauty that makes people reflect on everything they've lost and everything they still have. Finally, John said, "Can I read it?" "The notebook?" Sarah hesitated, then handed it to him. "Just don't judge my handwriting," she said with a small smile. He opened it. Inside were pages filled with memories, dates, drawings, small notes of gratitude. Some entries were funny, others heartbreaking. One read, "Tonight, Emily asked me if love disappears when people stop talking. I told her no, it hides, but it never dies." John closed the notebook and wiped a tear. He turned to Sarah. "You've been keeping our family alive in ways I couldn't see." She smiled softly. "Maybe now we can do it together." They sat there until the last light faded, the sound of crickets rising around them, the weight of unspoken forgiveness hanging gently in the air. John knew it wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust never was. But for the first time in a long while, he believed it was possible. The next few weeks felt different for John. Not perfect, but lighter. The house, once tense and filled with quiet suspicions, now seemed to breathe again. There was laughter in the kitchen, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, the sound of Emily running down the hallway with her hair still wet from her shower, asking, "Dad, can we go to the park today?" And every time she said it, something in his chest softened. He realized how many moments he had missed. The way she smiled with her eyes, the little gap between her front teeth, the way she talked endlessly about things he barely understood. Stories from school, favorite songs, imaginary friends. Before, he might have nodded absently, half listening. Now he was fully there. One evening, while Sarah was finishing dinner, John helped Emily with her homework at the dining table. She was working on a story for her English class, a story about a family who lived in a small town and discovered a magical book that could remember everything. John chuckled softly. "A magical book, huh? Sounds familiar." Emily smiled proudly. "Mom told me you read her notebook. She said you cried." John blushed a little, smiling. "Yeah, your mom's a good writer. She said it's for me. So I'll never forget things," Emily said, twirling her pencil. "But I told her I don't need a book for that. I remember with my heart." That simple line hit him like lightning. He smiled, but inside he felt a quiet ache. The ache of realizing how much children understand without even trying. After dinner, the three of them sat on the couch. Emily fell asleep halfway through a movie, her head resting on John's shoulder. Sarah watched quietly, her expression soft. In that small, ordinary moment, John felt something extraordinary. Peace. But peace, he would soon learn, comes with its own kind of fragility. The next morning, John got a call from his work. A promotion, something he'd been waiting for years to hear. But it came with a cost. Longer hours, more travel, less time at home. He didn't answer right away. The thought of going back to the version of himself who missed dinners, skipped bedtime stories, and hid behind tired excuses filled him with dread. That night, as Emily slept and Sarah washed the dishes, John stood in the hallway looking at the closed door to his daughter's room. The small camera he had installed weeks ago still sat hidden behind the bookshelf. Unused now, but still there. A relic of his own mistakes. He walked in quietly, unplugged it, and placed it in his pocket. Then he noticed something on Emily's desk, a drawing. It showed 3 stick figures, a mom, a dad, and a little girl holding hands under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in uneven letters, she had written, "We're together again." John sat on the edge of her bed, watching her sleep, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. He thought about his own father, how distant he'd been, always too busy, always somewhere else. John had promised himself he'd be different. But life, in its quiet cruelty, had slowly turned him into a shadow of that same man. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. "I'll do better," he whispered. "I promise." The next morning, Sarah noticed the unplugged camera on the kitchen counter. John didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She simply smiled, nodded once, and continued pouring coffee. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Over the next few days, John started showing up for the little things. Breakfast before school, helping Emily pack her bag, joining Sarah in the kitchen after dinner. They laughed more, talked more, and sometimes they simply existed together in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. One night, as he tucked Emily into bed, she looked up at him sleepily and said, "Dad, you don't look sad anymore." John smiled. "That's because you make me happy." "Even when I draw on the walls?" He chuckled. "Even then." She giggled, hugging him tightly. "Good, I like when you laugh." After she fell asleep, John stayed by her bedside for a while. The soft hum of the night filled the room, the same room where suspicion once grew, now full of peace and warmth. He looked at the notebook on her nightstand, the one Sarah still wrote in every night. He opened to a new page and, for the first time, wrote something himself. "Tonight, I learned that trust isn't about knowing everything. It's about loving enough to not need to." He placed the notebook back carefully, kissed Emily's forehead, and turned off the light. Down the hallway, Sarah waited, smiling faintly. They walked back to their room hand in hand, quietly but together. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when John received the call. The promotion he had postponed, the one he thought he could live without, was still open. The voice on the other end of the line said, "John, the company values your loyalty. We can make it official if you're ready to step up, but we need someone who can commit fully. You'd start next month. In Chicago." Chicago, hundreds of miles away. John thanked them and said he needed time to think. When he hung up, the house was still. He could hear the faint sound of cartoons playing in the living room, Emily's laughter echoing down the hallway. He stood there for a long time, staring at his phone, the weight of that single decision pressing down on him. It wasn't just about a job. It was about who he wanted to be, for himself and for them. That night at dinner, he told Sarah. She didn't say anything at first. She simply set down her fork, folded her hands, and waited. He explained the offer, the salary, the opportunities, all the things that used to excite him. But now as the words came out, they felt hollow. Sarah looked at him gently. "And what do you want, John?" He hesitated. For years that question had been easy. He wanted success, respect, progress. Now he wasn't so sure. "I don't know," he admitted. I don't want to go back to being that man again." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's your answer." But that night, after everyone was asleep, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought of his father, always working late, always saying, "It's for the family." But the truth was, his father's absence had hurt more than any unpaid bill ever could. John didn't want Emily to grow up like that. He didn't want to become the ghost he once feared. Still, there was fear inside him, fear of failure, fear of disappointing the world outside their little home. The next morning, he took Emily to school. She sat in the back seat, humming to a song from her favorite show, kicking her feet lightly. At a red light, she leaned forward. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Are you happy?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He looked at her through the rearview mirror, her innocent eyes, her messy hair, the little smile that reminded him of Sarah. "I think I'm learning to be," he said quietly. She grinned. "Good, I like when you're happy. You tell better jokes." He laughed softly, but his eyes grew wet. That evening, John sat on the porch alone. The sun was setting, casting orange light over the street. He could hear Sarah and Emily laughing inside, the faint sound of clinking, dishes and music playing softly from the radio. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine Chicago, the skyline, the office lights, the sound of ambition humming in the air. But all he could think about was home. He realized that no view, no paycheck, no title could ever replace this. The warmth of being needed, the peace of belonging. Later that night, Sarah joined him on the porch. "You've been quiet," she said softly. "Just thinking," he replied. "About the offer?" He nodded. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Whatever you decide, we'll make it work, together." For a long time they sat in silence, and then finally he spoke. "I'm staying." Sarah turned to look at him, tears already in her eyes. "Are you sure?" John nodded. "I used to think success meant providing for my family, but now I know it means being with my family." She smiled through her tears. "You already are, John." The next morning, John called his boss. He thanked them for the opportunity and declined. When he hung up, he felt something lift from his shoulders. That day, he walked Emily to school instead of just dropping her off. They held hands, talking about everything and nothing at the same time. When she waved goodbye at the gate, she turned back and shouted, "Love you, Dad." He froze for a second, overcome by a feeling he hadn't felt in years. The pure, unfiltered joy of being seen. "Love you, Dad." He froze for a second, overcome by a feeling he hadn't felt in years. The pure, unfiltered joy of being seen. That night, he returned home to find Sarah waiting with 2 cups of tea. They sat by the window, the rain tapping softly against the glass. Sarah smiled. "You did the right thing." John looked at her and said, "For the first time, I think I really believe that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, the drawing Emily had made weeks ago, the one that said, "We're together again." He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it with his hand. Sarah leaned closer, smiling. "Maybe it's time we frame it," she said. John nodded. "Yeah, it's not just her drawing. It's our reminder." That night, as he turned off the lights and checked on Emily one last time, he whispered to himself, This is what matters." And in that quiet moment, standing in the doorway of his daughter's room, John finally understood. Happiness wasn't something you found in the world. It was something you protected at home. It was late, on a Friday night, when John found it. He had gone to the attic to look for an old family photo album. Emily's school had asked for a family picture day, and he wanted to bring something special. The attic was quiet, dusty, filled with boxes that smelled like time. He lifted the lid of one and found bits of their old life, a toy rattle from Emily's first birthday, a faded Christmas card, the receipt for their first home, and then at the bottom, tucked between 2 books, there was a small envelope. It had his name written on it, in Sarah's handwriting. His breath caught. The paper was yellowed slightly at the edges, as if it had been there for years. He sat on an old wooden chair, the attic light flickering softly, and opened it. Inside was a folded letter. He unfolded it carefully, and the first line read, "To the man I still believe in." John's throat tightened. He read on, "If you're reading this, it means something brought you back here. Maybe curiosity, maybe regret, or maybe the hope that never really left. There was a time when I didn't know if we'd make it. You were distant, tired, angry at things you couldn't name. I tried to fill the silence between us, but sometimes love isn't enough when it's not shared. I want you to know I never hated you, John. I just missed you. Missed the man who used to dance with Emily in the living room. Missed the laughter that used to echo through this house. I stayed because I believed that man was still there, just lost, not gone. If you ever find this letter, I hope you found your way back. Not to me or to what we were, but to who you really are. Because that's who Emily needs. And that's who I fell in love with." John stopped reading for a moment, his vision blurred with tears. He could hear the faint sounds of laughter downstairs. Sarah and Emily watching a movie, completely unaware of the storm in his chest. He wiped his eyes and continued, "If someday you understand what this family means, not as a responsibility, but as a gift, then I want you to do one thing. Write it down, so Emily will know what love truly looks like. Love isn't perfect, John. It's patient, and sometimes it's broken. But it's real. And that's enough." At the bottom of the page, Sarah had drawn a small heart, and beside it, 3 names. Sarah, John, Emily. He sat there for a long time, holding the letter against his chest. The attic light buzzed quietly. It felt as though the whole world had gone still, just him, the air, and her words. He thought back to that night weeks ago when he had installed the camera. The guilt, the loneliness, the fear of losing control. And now this, a letter written years ago. Before the distance, before the silence. She had already forgiven him long before he even asked for it. Tears rolled down his face, not of sorrow this time, but of release. He felt something open inside him, a quiet acceptance he hadn't known he needed. He stood, folded the letter carefully, and walked downstairs. Sarah was in the kitchen, rinsing a bowl. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch again. John approached slowly, holding the letter. "Sarah," he said softly. She turned, surprised. "What's that?" He handed it to her. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw it. "Oh," she whispered. "You found it. You wrote this. Years ago?" She nodded. "When things were hard. I didn't know if you'd ever see it." John swallowed. "I wish I had. Back then." She smiled faintly. "Maybe you weren't ready." He took a deep breath. "I think I am now." They stood there in silence for a moment. 2 people who had walked through storms and somehow still found their way back to shore. Then Sarah reached out, touched his hand gently and said, "Then write it down." He blinked. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "What you've learned. For Emily, for us." He nodded slowly, and that night, after everyone went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, the same one Sarah used to write in every night. He opened to a blank page and began to write. "For Emily, once upon a time your father thought love meant protecting people from pain, but he was wrong. Love means standing in the pain together and choosing each other anyway." He stopped, wiped a tear, and smiled. Then he continued writing. Not as a man trying to fix the past, but as a man finally living the present. When morning came, Sarah found him asleep at the table, his head resting beside the open notebook. She read what he'd written and smiled through tears. She didn't wake him. She just placed a blanket over his shoulders and whispered, "You found your way home, John." The forecast had warned about it all week. A heavy storm approaching from the west. John didn't think much of it. He'd seen dozens before, but that night, when the first rumble shook the windows, he felt something different. It wasn't just the weather. It was the kind of storm that seemed to mirror what life throws at you when you finally start to feel safe again. Rain began to fall in sheets, hammering the roof. The wind howled through the trees, bending them like bowing giants. Inside the house, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Emily shrieked from her room. "Dad!" John jumped from the couch, flashlight in hand. "I'm coming, sweetheart." He reached her door, pushed it open, and found her clutching her stuffed bear, eyes wide in the dark. "It's okay," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "It's just the power. I've got you." Sarah joined them a moment later, holding candles. Her face glowed in the flickering light, calm but alert. "The radio says it's a strong one," she murmured. "Winds up to 80 miles per hour." John nodded. "Let's stay downstairs." They gathered in the living room, lighting a few more candles. The house creaked under the force of the wind, each sound sharp against the silence between thunderclaps. Emily nestled between them on the couch, her small hand gripping John's tightly. "Is the house going to break, Dad?" He smiled gently. "No, baby. It's strong, just like us." Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. At one point, a loud crash echoed from outside, the sound of a tree branch snapping and slamming against the roof. Sarah flinched. That was close. John grabbed his jacket. "I'll check the attic. Make sure it didn't break through." "Be careful," she called after him. Upstairs, the wind screamed through a small crack in the window frame. Rainwater was seeping in, pooling near the boxes where he had found the letter. He grabbed towels, pressed them against the leak, and taped a plastic sheet over the crack. Then, in the faint light of his flashlight, he saw the box again, the one marked Family Memories. Inside it, the letter he'd read, the drawings, the old photos, all the things that reminded him of who they were. He lifted it carefully, brought it downstairs, and set it on the table like a treasure chest. Sarah smiled faintly. "You saved the important stuff." "Yeah," he said, sitting beside her. "I couldn't lose this again." As midnight approached, the storm grew worse. The radio warned of possible flooding near the river. John looked toward the front door. Small puddles of water were already creeping across the floor. He grabbed towels, sealed the gap with duct tape, and set a bucket by the door. Sarah joined him, holding a candle. For a moment they looked at each other, the wind roaring outside. "It's strange," Sarah said softly. "A few months ago, a night like this would have torn us apart." John smiled wearily. "And now?" "Now," she said, taking his hand. "We face it together." He squeezed her hand back. "Always." Around 2 a.m., the rain finally began to slow. The storm had passed, but the damage was clear. Branches scattered in the yard, power still out, water soaking the kitchen floor. John went outside to assess it. The air was cool, clean, alive. The world looked bruised but beautiful. As he stood in the doorway, Sarah came up behind him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. He turned to her, smiling. "Remember what your letter said?" he asked quietly. She tilted her head. "Which part?" "The one about standing in the pain together." Sarah nodded. "I meant every word." He looked out at the broken branches glistening under the streetlight. "You were right. Love isn't about avoiding storms. It's about knowing which ones are worth standing in." When morning came, sunlight broke through the gray. Emily ran outside barefoot, laughing as she jumped in puddles. Her laughter carried through the air, pure and bright. like a melody the storm had been waiting to end for. John and Sarah watched from the porch, hands entwined. He turned to her and said, "Do you realize something?" "What?" she asked. "Last night was the first time I wasn't afraid of losing you." Sarah smiled softly. "That's because you finally know you never had to." He kissed her forehead, pulling her close as Emily spun in circles, the world still dripping and new. For the first time in a long time, everything felt still, not because life was easy, but because they had finally learned to weather it together. The storm was gone, but its voice still lingered in the air. The world outside looked like it had exhaled. Branches scattered, puddles glimmering, a hush hanging between the clouds and the earth. Inside the house, everything smelled of rain and candle wax. John woke before sunrise. The power hadn't come back yet, and the first light crept through the curtains, painting soft gold lines across the living room floor. He stood there for a moment, just listening. No thunder, no wind, only silence, the kind that felt earned. He walked through the house quietly, checking for damage. A cracked window, a fallen picture frame. The old clock on the wall had stopped at 2:07 a.m. The moment the storm began to calm, he left it that way, almost as if to remember. In the kitchen, Sarah was already awake, brewing coffee on a small camping stove. She smiled when she saw him. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied. Her hair was messy, her sweater damp at the cuffs, but her eyes were warm. They didn't need to talk about the night before. The silence between them said enough. Emily padded in a few minutes later, her feet splashing softly on the still wet tiles. "Can we go outside?" she asked. John looked at Sarah, who nodded. "Put your boots on first," he said, grinning. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up slowly. Neighbors swept driveways, collected fallen branches, shared tools. It was the kind of morning that reminded everyone how fragile and connected they really were. Emily ran ahead, jumping over puddles. John followed, watching her laughter bounce through the cool air. For a moment he imagined time slowing, just long enough to memorize the sound. Because he knew that one day she would be older, and mornings like this would live only in memory. Sarah joined him on the porch steps, handing him a cup of coffee. Steam rose into the cold air, curling between them like smoke from an old fire finally fading out. "She's happy," Sarah whispered. "She doesn't remember fear," John said. Sarah smiled. "That's because she sees the world through you now." John looked at her, almost disbelieving. "Through me?" She nodded. "You've changed. You stay, you listen." That's all she ever wanted. He took a slow sip of coffee, eyes drifting toward the horizon. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing a pale stretch of blue. He thought about everything. The camera, the doubts, the letter, the storm. Each had been its own kind of test. Each had stripped away something false until only the truth remained. He spoke quietly, more to himself than to her. "You ever wonder if peace lasts?" Sarah shrugged gently. "Maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe it just visits, like the sun after rain." He nodded, letting her words sink in. Behind them, the house stood scarred but standing like them. That evening, the lights finally came back on. Emily cheered, spinning around the living room. Sarah clapped, laughing. John walked to the wall and restarted the old clock. 2:07 a.m. Tick! The sound was small but steady, a heartbeat returning. Later, after Emily went to bed, John sat by the window, notebook in hand. He opened to the same page where he had written before and added, "There will always be storms. Sometimes they come from the sky, sometimes from the heart, but the ones worth surviving are the ones that teach you who you are when the world goes quiet." He closed the book, placed it beside Sarah's letter, and looked out into the night. The stars had returned, faint, scattered, imperfect. Beautiful in their own way. Sarah joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He smiled softly. "That we'll be fine. Maybe not forever, but for now." She nodded. For now is enough. They stayed like that for a long time. The hum of the repaired lights mixing with the whisper of the wind outside. No grand music. No final revelation, just life, fragile and whole again. And somewhere, deep inside, John knew that tomorrow would bring new storms. But this time he wouldn't face them alone. Soft piano plays. The camera slowly pans across the house, the repaired window, Emily's drawings taped on the wall. Sarah watering a plant by the kitchen window. John voiceover. "I used to believe cameras could tell the truth, that if I just recorded enough I'd finally see what I was missing. But some things can't be seen that way." Some truths are quiet, hidden. They live in moments you can't replay. The video cuts to Emily laughing in the garden, chasing bubbles. Sarah watches from the porch, smiling. John voiceover. For a long time, I thought I was trying to protect my family. But maybe I was really just trying to protect myself. From fear, from loss, from the possibility that love changes, even when you don't want it to. Camera shows John fixing the old clock on the wall again. The second hand ticks. Time moves. John voiceover. The night I installed that camera, I thought I was searching for answers. Now I know. I was searching for forgiveness. Not from them. From me. Cut to John helping Emily with her homework. The candle on the table flickering like in the storm. John voiceover. It's strange. How life teaches you through the same hands that hurt you. How the person you once doubted can still be the one who stays when everything breaks. Sarah never left. She just waited for me to look up. Camera shows John and Sarah sitting together, holding hands as the sun sets through the window. John voiceover. I still check the cameras sometimes, but not to watch the past. Just to remind myself that love, real love, is what happens when no one's watching. Fade to night. The camera pans toward the sky outside, stars faintly glowing, the wind gentle. John voiceover. Every storm leaves a mark. On the house, on the heart, but if you're lucky, it also leaves a light, small, flickering, enough to find your way home again. Piano slows. The screen fades to black. Text on screen. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It teaches you how to begin again.